the most terrifying book of all time. The Malleus Maleficarum, or The Witch's Hammer. This is not a cheap B-movie production. This is a book that actually existed, and it cost between 40 to 60,000 people their lives in the most gruesome way, and tens of thousands more were tortured because of this very book.
Say what?
Let's start with the beginning. It all begins with an institution called the Inquisition, not yet the famous Spanish Inquisition.
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition!
In the early days of the church, the popes realized that there were a lot of movements that were contradicting Catholic dogma and teaching, and they called these movements heretics. And of course, they did their best to stamp them out. And to achieve that, they appointed the Dominican friars to go and look around as inquisitors, people who question, to find people who were not of the true Catholic faith and to extirpate them. So pretty much they franchised this Inquisition function to the Dominicans. They started wandering around and found people who they believed to be heretics, and either they converted back to the true church or they would be tortured and in that way convinced to come back into the fold of the mother church. Torturing in this case was seen as an act of mercy, strangely enough. Why? Because the issue was, if you do not believe in the true Catholic faith, you'd go to hell. Hence, it was much more humane to torture you to the point where you would actually come back to Mother Church and your soul would be saved. Only if there was no recourse, you would be handed over to the flames. So in a very warped way, it was the biggest act of mercy to torture you until you admitted and then reconverted to the church. Over the centuries, they were quite successful and they were able to root out some of the major movements like Albigensians or the Cathars. What set in was mission creep, slowly but surely, and moving away from larger groups, they started focusing a little bit on something called witches, which had been a bit of a problem, but not such a large problem, quote unquote. In the medieval ages, the natural phenomena like hails or cattle not giving birth or fields lying fallow because of bad weather were not explainable. So in that case, people said there must be something foul afoot and there must be some witchcraft happening. But witches were not front and center of a concentrated movement of persecution and extirpation that only started with the appearance of one very strange man. And this man was Heinrich Kramer with his Latinized name of Institoris. Everybody who was cool in those ages needed to have a Latinized name. Anyhow, Heinrich Kramer was a Dominican friar and monk, also an appointed inquisitor, like the spiritual sheriff. And he was called to a town called Innsbruck in 1485 to preside over the judgment of 13 possible witches to figure out if they're witches or not. And one of these women, one of the women of the 13 people, was a very outspoken lady who had seen right through him and even on the street had insulted him and said, "You are weird, you are strange." She didn't go to his sermons, and she actually said to people, "Don't go to his sermons. This man is obviously cuckoo in the head," which for him meant she must be a witch because she was speaking against God's word represented by him. So far, so bad, but it gets worse. During the trial, the man became obvious as a sexual deviant and pervert because the only thing he was asking the women specifically was about their sexual activities and proclivities, because in his view of the world, Satan was always going for women because women were the weaker sex, and through sexual activity, Satan made the women his slaves, and through these women, they would then get access to the men because the men were too strong to fall for Satan directly. What became evident to the audience and as well as to the archbishop in charge of that area was the man was completely cuckoo, and they actually threw him out. They said, "This trial is over, it's a complete kangaroo court, and you are a complete fruitcake." Out he goes, and he was very angry. And that anger turned into this book that became the most dangerous book in history. Before Kramer wrote this book, the Malleus Maleficarum, the Witch's Hammer, there was no institutionalized witch hunting hysteria. When weather phenomena happened here and there, sometimes people blamed the witch. If there was, a hailstorm and destroyed all the crop, who was guilty? Modern technology didn't exist. It must have been that old strange lady. And sadly enough, she got burned. but it was not institutionalized. This is where Kramer came in and said, wait a second, these people are unaware of the danger. I will write the manual, first of all, explaining that witches exist, chapter 1. Number 2, how to recognize the witches. And number 3, how to put them through due process, including all the methods of torture, of legal process, and also how to dispose of these witches once they confessed through torture, to then be disposed through fire. When he passed the draft of his book around, the results were less than encouraging. Most people who read the book said, this is completely insane. It's complete gobbledygook. It doesn't make any sense at all. So he had a marketing problem at his hand that he solved in a 3-pronged strategy. The first thing he did is he went to Rome and he passed around some cash to get a papal bull, which is almost like it's papal law. The Pope has decided this is law, this sticks. It's almost divine law. And the bull that he got paid and signed for was called Summis Desiderantes, which just stated 2 simple things. That first of all, witches do exist, okay, everybody knew it at that point anyhow, if you so wish. And at the same time, it also said, yeah, this man is an official witch hunter or official witch sheriff, which was already the case anyhow. But what he did with this bull was very clever. He stuck it as a first page into the Malleus Maleficarum, into his book, which meant that people who opened the book before they even read the garbage he had written went like, wait a second, this has been sanctioned by the highest authority. So everything that it says in there must be sanctioned by the Pope himself. Now, to make it even better, he got himself a professor from the best university in Germany called Jakob Springer. Jakob Springer was an eminent professor in a university called Cologne, one of the most preeminent on the continent. He invited him to co-author the book. Essentially, he wrote most of the book, and it was an exercise in co-branding. He was not as well known as Jakob Springer, so all of a sudden he had Jakob Springer by his side, and he had more name recognition. Classic marketing. After the book was finished, and after they already had the papal bull, just to put an extra cherry on the topic, he took Jakob Springer to his alma mater and passed the book around to about 8 or 9 professors who were teaching there and said, please look at the book and give us your endorsement. These guys didn't even read the book, and I said, as a courtesy to our co-professor Jakob Springer, absolutely legible, fantastic stuff. It's going to be a bestseller. The only professor actually that has been in evidence who actually read the book said, I will not sign this paper. This book is blatantly insane.
No, God!
As it were, the 3-pronged strategy paid off. The book did get published with the papal bull, which did not even talk about the book, with the blessings of Mr. Springer, who was a famous professor, and the seeming endorsement of 8 or 9 other eminent professors. All of a sudden, of course, the people said, there is no doubt, this must be true. The core of the book focuses on women, because women were, again, as I said before, the weaker sex and lusty and not capable of clear thinking. Thus, they were the vessels through which Satan could penetrate with his lustful ways and then get into good men. This was the craze that turned witches, neutral, male, female, into female. Witches nowadays, we all say are female. It wasn't like that. So right now, we're looking at women, and the female witch hysteria takes off. Anybody who saw something strange in another person could actually go, I think that's a witch. Now, here we go. We're in the medieval times. We're in little villages, candlelight, it's cold, it's dark. Stuff happens, weird stuff happens. Well, we cannot explain it, must have been her. Most of the people who got hit by this were normally poorish peasant women. Also women who travel through towns sometimes because she was not known to the people in the town. Something strange happened, must have been her. Now, the way to get a person to confess is, of course, torture. The way they were torturing was amazing. Thumb screws, head crushers, like metal devices that would literally screw into your brain until it popped your cranium. Or the strappato, where would tie your arms up and literally pull you up and pull the sockets out until people confessed. Some women went through several rounds of this without confessing, which is extraordinary. They were then let go, physical wrecks, but, well, their reputation intact, whatever that meant to them. As the witch craze continued, of course, it got more and more elaborate and it got more and more crazy. To the point, for example, where they said witches must be lighter than air. Why? Well, because they fly, on their brooms. So one of the tests was, I think she's a witch. Okay, they grabbed the poor woman, they put her into a bag made out of leather, and they would dunk her in a river or in a lake. Of course, a body floats up, right? So they used to dunk the person down and down with sticks until the person drowned. The lungs filled with water, sack sank to the ground. They said, we've liberated her. Now she's not a witch anymore. That's how nuts it was. The only way to actually save your name, if you could make it that far, was a place called Odewater in Holland. Because the Dutch were not part of that craze as much as the rest of Europe was. And they said, this is totally stupid. We will have a balance on which we will weigh you correctly with correct weights. Because the way to prove you're not a witch was to get weighed. I weigh something more than air. Most towns had bogus scales. They actually were bogus. Why? Very simple. Because if I accuse somebody to be a witch, and she actually was found to be a witch, I would get commission from all that she owned. This also means that many of these scales were bogus, a real fact. The only way, if you were lucky enough to make it, was if somebody says, that's a witch, get out and get to Odewater in Holland, get yourself weighed. So they literally had like an underground trek of people escaping from whichever town they'd been accused to be a witch. You made it to Odewater, you got on the scales, you got weighed, and you actually got a real life certificate certifying that you are not a witch. And this certificate was backed up by an edict of Charles V, the emperor, who said also, this is kind of crazy. So, okay, Odewater, we believe in you. You guys get the official edict. Whoever gets weighed on your scales and is not a witch gets the certificate, untouchable. You're free now and good to go. The last eruptions of massive witch hysteria actually took place in America, the famous Salem witch trials. After that, lucky for everybody, science started to creep in, and slowly but surely enlightenment took hold, and all this craziness started ebbing away. But in the meantime, this book had cost roughly 60,000 people their lives in the most horrendous way, and tens of thousands of people had been mutilated on the way to their own freedom. And if you liked the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.